About a year or two ago, Bill called me on the phone one day, and I was all excited about his new book. And he said to me, Bob, I was with Dave Reagan recently, and he kind of had a nickname for me. He called me the Star Trek eschatologist. He says, you think Gary could introduce me as the Star Trek eschatologist? And my quick answer was, no.
Well, on the contrary, Bob, I'd like to introduce to you right now Bill Salas, the Star Trek eschatologist. Welcome, Bill.
I know how hard it is for you to call me the Star Trek eschatologist.
And I'd just like to tell you all that this man goes into detail, and you're going to learn a lot. So be prepared. Have your notes, your note-taking apparatus, whatever it may be, at the ready. Bill Salas.
Thank you, Gary. Well, thank you, everybody. Yes, Dr. Reagan said, I boldly dare to go where no man has gone before. That's how I got that nickname. And we're going to do a little bit of that tonight, not as much as I'm used to doing, but we're going to boldly dare to go where not many men have gone before. I'm talking about the LAST Prophecies. It's the third book in a sequel, an end time series. We're trying to sequence the prophecies between now and the second coming of Jesus Christ. A couple thousand verses that have not been fulfilled yet, and they're not all going to happen at the same time. Some could happen at the present time. We're looking at things right now, stage setting. I call them the now prophecies. Some things have a few preconditions. The next prophecies. Then we have the last prophecies. We've actually even taken, and because we want everyone to understand these prophecies, we've actually made a novel. How would a family go through these prophecies, an Israeli family and an American family, as they unfold? It's one thing to talk about Bible prophecies. It's entirely another thing to see how they're going to affect you. And folks, we may be here for some of these now prophecies that are coming. Jesus could come get us at any given time, so we want to redeem the time, of course, but we also want to know what could also come our way, and that's what we try to do in this series from start to finish. So I'm going to start by playing my book trailer so that you can get a direction as to where I'm going to go in my talk tonight.
Ancient biblical prophecies are about to roll off of their parchments and pound down on the pavement, and they promise to pack a powerful global punch. But the good news is that God has given this generation the prophetic information that they need to know. Hello. I'm Bill Salas, and I encourage you to read my book entitled The LAST Prophecies. Through this book, you will discover what happens in the first 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period.
As you can see from that list up there, there's a lot of prophecies in the first half of the tribulation period, first 3.5 years. So the now prophecies, just briefly to introduce these to you, are those unfulfilled ancient biblical predictions that appear to be imminent, which means they could happen now at the present time. These foretellings have either minor or no remaining preconditions inhibiting from happening at this present time. Some of these things that we talked about in my earlier session would deal with a disaster in Iran, the Elam prophecy, the destruction of Damascus, Isaiah 17, the toppling of Jordan, terrorization of Egypt, the final Arab-Israeli war of Psalm 83, the decline of America, the expansion of Israel. Israel is going to grow into a greater, safer nation, and then the vanishing of the Christians. This can all happen and we might still be here. We could be raptured prior, but these types of things could be happening while we're still on the earth. The next prophecies, they have some preconditions, at least one or more significant preconditions prohibiting them from finding their final fulfillment. Although these prophecies appear to be stage settings, something epic, some event is still preventing them from finding their fulfillment. And some of those things would be the destruction of Russia, Ezekiel 38, upholding of God's holy name through that event, the decline of Islam. Yes, Allah is about to lose his Akbar, his greatness. The constructing of the third Jewish temple, we'll talk a little bit about that. Harlot world religion, mystery Babylon, the 144,000 Jewish witnesses, we'll also be talking about that. The rise of the Antichrist, and unfortunately, there are 3 different periods of Christian martyrdom that will be coming, and some of them we cover. The first period we talk about in the Next Prophecies book. Now, the Next Prophecies book, one of the things that it did was it introduced a gap. It's a post-rapture, pre-tribulation gap period. It's not the rapture that starts the tribulation period. It's a confirmation of a false covenant. So there's not the rapture that starts it. There's a gap of unspecified period of time. I didn't say, hey, wow, I found this gap. Many of our colleagues, prophecy teachers, know there's a gap. They recognize there's a gap. Even Jeff Kinley was talking about this in his session earlier. And I think it was yesterday he was talking about that. So I didn't invent that. That exists right now. But I dared to explore in it. I dared to go into it and try to see if certain things would fit in there. Some people believe, like Mark Hitchcock, David Reagan, Gary Stearman, myself, this gap could actually be for a couple years. And if it is, this is a powerful time. The rapture's happened. Supernatural becomes the natural. The paranormal becomes the new normal. Satan is no longer restrained. You would have to imagine something is going to be happening in that period of time. So I dared to go in there and explore that, and you'll find that out in the Next Prophecies book, what I think could be going on in that powerful gap period. So here's how this plays out. You have a church age, and I'm going to put a picture of L.A. Marzulli. He's such a great representative of the church, right? So Heavenly Father's going to say to his son, Jesus Christ, go get your bride. L.A.'s going to go up, and they're going to show up. You know his famous saying, we go up, they show up, right? He's got me convinced, folks, that this could be the strong delusion, this UFO deception and that sort of thing. It certainly makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm not sure they're going to show up in the gap period or if they're going to show up in the tribulation period, okay? But to reiterate, it's not the rapture, it's something else, and that prompts Israel to confirm a false covenant that starts the 7-year tribulation period clock ticking. So let's look at the timeline. I'm going to show you several timeline images for you note takers or picture takers. These are in the book, because I'm not going to go ahead and spend a lot of time on each image. But we'll talk about this one first. You have the rapture. It could happen at any time. You have that gap. We don't know how long that will be. You have the false covenant that gets confirmed. Then you get into the first half of the 7-year tribulation period. It's real clear that the 7-year tribulation period is probably the most time-specific period of prophecy in all the Bible. We're given 1,260 days, 42 months, times and a half of times repeatedly. Time meaning 1 year, times 2 years, a half a time, a half a year, 3.5 years. Clearly, the first half is 3.5 years. And then we get into the midpoint, a lot going on there. And then we get into the second half. It's commonly called the Great Tribulation period. Again, we have those references of the 1,260 days and some verses, 42 months, etc. Clearly a first half of 3.5 years and a second half of 3.5 years. And then we get into a 75-day interval period. Some of you may not be familiar with this. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then we get into the millennium, where Jesus Christ reigns on the earth for 1,000 years. So we've got this timeline that we're looking at. We find ourselves in the church age now. The rapture is going to take us out. And then these events start to happen. So the prophecies in the first half of the tribulation, I'm going to talk about these, and some of these will be the point of my discussion for tonight. After Ezekiel 38, and I believe that's a pre-tribulation event, Russia's going to be stopped in its tracks, this big coalition, and it says Israel's going to burn all these weapons from these invaders for 7 years. And I believe that could actually overlap a little bit into the first part of the tribulation. So that might be something we see in that first half of the tribulation. There'll be signs and lying wonders because Satan will no longer be restrained and he will forward his campaign of deception in the end times. The harlot world religion of Mystery Babylon, the 144,000 Hebrew evangelists will prompt a worldwide Christian revival. That's exciting. Christian martyrdom by the harlot world religion, the third Jewish temple, the two witnesses, the seal judgments, trumpet judgments, the unholy harlot and Antichrist alliance, and then those 10 kings. And then we get into the midpoint of the tribulation. We have the death and resurrection of the Antichrist, the desolation of the harlot by the 10 kings, the death of the two witnesses. They actually resurrect and ascend in the midpoint. Abomination of desolation, spoken by Daniel the prophet, the false prophet. The mark of the beast campaign gets implemented right there, the image of his beast, and the 666, you've all heard about that, that apocalyptic number. War in heaven, Satan is cast down to the earth at the midpoint, Revelation chapter 12. The persecution of the Jews, Satan will then unleash the Antichrist to try to commit genocide of the Jews. That begins at the midpoint of the tribulation. The seventh trumpet sounds, the third woe, the three woe judgments. We'll be talking about two of them tonight. These are woe because they're very, very bad. We're going to get into the second half of the tribulation, the Great Tribulation. You have the woman in the wilderness of Revelation chapter 12 rather. You have the seven bowl judgments in which the wrath of God is completed. That happens in the second half. And you have the 8 stages of the Armageddon campaign. The Antichrist assembles his allies. There's a destruction of commercial Babylon, Revelation 18. The fall of Jerusalem. The Antichrist armies go to Petra, Jordan, to try to take out the remnant of Jews that are hiding there in refuge. The natural regeneration of Israel, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the battle at the Valley of Jehoshaphat, Christ's ascent up to the Mount of Olives. Now, let's talk about this 75-day interval for those of you who are not familiar with it. That's what happens after the Great Tribulation. We find out about this in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 12, and it says, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days." So that's 30 days. So 1,260 days is the second half of the tribulation. That exceeds it by 30 days, 1,290 days. But then he says this, "Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days." So you do the math. I got the formula up there. 1,335 days minus the 1,260, second half of the tribulation. That's 75-day interval. Now, I bring that up because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in that 75-day interval. The Antichrist and the false prophet are cast into the lake of fire. Satan is bound for 1,000 years into the abyss, the bottomless pit. You have the sheep and goat judgment Gentile of Matthew 25. The first resurrection, the resurrection of the Old Testament saints, the resurrection of the tribulation saints, and the marriage supper of the Lamb. So again, these are all timeline images in the book. They're very reader-friendly. That helps you kind of understand events as they're going to come. So they're in the book. Now, before I proceed, some of you might be going, listen, I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in a pre-trib rapture. I'm not going to be here for this stuff. Why should I care? I hear that a lot, folks. So let me qualify why you should care. You know, the good news is, hey, we're not appointed to wrath. We're going to be saved from the wrath that is to come. In Romans 5, by Jesus Christ, Romans 5, he's going to deliver us from this wrath that's going to come out in this tribulation period. 1 Thessalonians 1. This is exciting news. We're not appointed to this wrath. And 1 Thessalonians 5. And he will also keep us from the hour of trial that's going to come upon the earth. And we're to comfort one another with these words. This is exciting. I understand. We won't be here. The stuff I'm talking about primarily is for the people that will be left behind. This is exciting. I had a gal come up to my table. She was talking to me. She goes, "Look at all these signs, Bill. Does that mean Jesus must be coming real soon?" And I said, "Yeah." And she was like a little child, started jumping up and down, got excited. And so this is exciting. This is ecstatic. We should realize this. At the same token, let me get a show of hands. If Jesus were to come in the very near future, do you have anyone in your family? It could be a child, a spouse, a grandchild, some loved one in your family, your neighbor, someone in your sphere of influence, that if Jesus were to come right now, you're concerned that they wouldn't be raptured, but they'd be left behind. Can I get a show of hands on that? Okay, you know, all the hands are pretty much up in this room. Okay, that's why we care, folks, okay? So we encounter the concerns about what's about to happen that I'm going to be showing you. You wouldn't even want your worst enemy to experience these things, let alone the loved one you're thinking about. And I want you to think about this loved one periodically as I talk tonight, okay? Now, we also have the camp of people, like my friend Ron, who he's got his head knocked up on the tree. He is frustrated. He's tried to talk to his son, who keeps pulling his hair out. He's tried to talk to his daughter. She says, "You drive me crazy. I'm not listening anymore." His nephew, "I don't care. Stop it." You know, some of you may have encountered this, like my friend Ron, who basically says, what's the use? I don't want to talk about it anymore. They're not listening, and this sort of thing. So I say to Ron, Ron, here's what you do. You get the Last Prophecies book, and you put a letter in it. Oh, before you read the book, and then you put this letter in the book. Because when you're raptured and you're gone, and that loved one that you folks have been raising your hand for comes scurrying through your house looking for your library to see what you knew and what you read and what you were trying to tell them, they're going to open this book and they're going to see a letter that says something like this. I'm not home, I'm in heaven. Wish you were here, but you didn't want to listen to me. Sorry to say, but I told you so. Read this book for further instructions about what you need to do next. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to revisit that letter and Ron as I close tonight. So let's start with the first half of the tribulation begins. It starts with the confirmation of the false covenant between Israel and some other party. And we're told one of the proof texts in this is Daniel 9, verse 27. Then he, referring to the Antichrist, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So what we're told here is that the Antichrist plays a key role in the confirmation of the false covenant. He may be the drafter of the covenant. I'm going to tell you why he's probably not a party to the covenant, but we do know for sure that he is the confirmer of the covenant. So we would use an example. It's a political figure that Israel will trust. We had examples of this. Bill Clinton, he was involved in the Jordan-Israel Treaty in 1994. Jimmy Carter in the treaty between Egypt and Israel in 1979. They trusted these political leaders to confirm a peace pact with these nations. So where does the Antichrist show up? He shows up when the first seal is opened as the white horseman of the apocalypse, the conqueror. And it says in Revelation 6, verses 1 and 2, I saw the Lamb open one of the seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying with a loud voice like thunder, come and see. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. And he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. So here's where the Antichrist comes on the scene, okay? And he's going to embark upon his threefold career. He's going to be a political leader. We know he's going to be trusted by Israel. And they trust him to confirm the covenant. He's going to be a military leader. We find out in Daniel 11 he is waging and winning a lot of wars. And he's going to become a supreme religious leader because in the second half of the tribulation he is going to have his image and put his Mark of the Beast campaign together and force people to worship him. So we know he's embarking upon those. And this could actually be where the false covenant gets confirmed and the tribulation starts, because he's on the scene. Israel's on the scene. He's on the scene. Most of my colleagues would say this is definitely where the tribulation period starts. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure the other party to the covenant is on the scene yet at this point. And I'm not sure the reason Israel covenants is happening at this point just yet either. But this very well could be where it gets confirmed. But we'll go a little bit further. So what does Daniel 9 tell us? There's going to be a 7-year term. It's going to be confirmed by the Antichrist with many, not few, with many. So we got to figure out, who's the many here. It seems to enable the temple to be built and the sacrifices and offerings to be performed, and that the Antichrist annuls this covenant at the midpoint by stopping the sacrifices and offerings through an abominable act, and he makes the temple desolate. But it doesn't tell us necessarily why Israel engages in this covenant, and it doesn't necessarily tell us who the other party is. It just says with the many, and of course Israel's among the many that's in this covenant. But we have another proof text written even before Daniel wrote his, more information about the false covenant written by Isaiah, and Isaiah's ministry was between 740 and 701 BC. And here's what he says in Isaiah 28, verse 15. Because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we are in agreement. When the overflowing scourge passes through, it will not come to us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hidden ourselves. So we have some important information right here. We find out that they've made a covenant with another party named Death and Sheol. So we're going to have to try to put a face on them. And why do they do this? Because apparently Death and Sheol are perpetrating an overflowing scourge that's sweeping through the earth. And Israel's very concerned about that, so therefore they covenant with the perpetrator, to avoid it so that it won't come upon them. And they do it in lies and falsehood. This is one of the reasons we call it a false covenant. So in essence, what it is, I'll explain what I think this is saying here, is that they're signing on a covenant with death and Sheol. We'll put a face on them. We'll talk about what the overflowing scourge is. They don't agree with what's going on. They're covenanting with it. It's politically expedient. They're doing it in lies and falsehood because they have an ulterior motive. Okay? And we'll talk about that ulterior motive in a minute. So the Antichrist is a party to this false covenant. He confirms that Israel's on the scene. Now we got to figure out who's death and Sheol. Do they also show up in the apocalypse? Are they one of the four horsemen? Well, it turns out it looks like they are. The Antichrist was a white horseman. Well, here comes the pale horseman, the fourth horse, in Revelation 6, 7, and 8. And he said, when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, come and see. So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death and Hades. Now, Hades is the Greek word for Sheol in the Hebrew. And it followed him, and the power was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, and with death through the beasts of the earth as well. So I want to recognize here, now most of my colleagues would say that this death in Hades is killing a quarter of the earth's population. Some estimate that could be 1 billion, maybe 2 billion people. We don't know exactly. We don't know how many are going to be raptured. And so they would say that this horseman is going to kill a quarter of the earth. Now, I'm going to say, I don't think that's exactly what is being said there. Here's what it says. They're given authority and power over a fourth of the earth to kill. Now, they could be killing a fourth of the earth, or they could be killing more than a fourth of the earth, or less. Okay? Let's compare this to the language in the 6 trumpet judgments I'll be talking about later. There's these 3 plagues, smoke, fire, and brimstone, that kill a third of mankind. It clearly says these 3 plagues, a third of mankind was killed. But that's not what the fourth horse, it says about the fourth horseman. Okay? So maybe it is killing a quarter of the earth, but I don't believe that's exactly what the language says. Well, when you go after the fourth seal, the fourth horseman, you have apparently some of their victims, the fifth seal saints. These are believers. These could be among the people you raised your hand for, that are killed by death in Hades, it looks like. They're dissenting from whatever death in Hades is propagating. The counterfeit, I believe this is going to, counterfeit gospel that's going to be going forward. I'll put a face on this for you, who I believe it is, in just a moment. So what we have here is these guys are saying, and they're under the altar, the souls of them that have been slain for the word of the God and the testimony which they held, and they cried with a loud voice saying, how long, O Lord? Now what an interesting question. Why are they asking that question on the timeline? And we're going to revisit that as I conclude. Holy and true until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth. So they want vengeance for the blood that's been shed. They've been martyred after the rapture. And they're asking God how much longer that's going to continue. Very interesting question. You're going to be amazed by God's response to them. And we'll visit that shortly. So Daniel tells us we have a 7-year term on the false covenant. It's confirmed by the Antichrist. It's going to enable the temple sacrifices. The Antichrist voids it out at the midpoint of the 7 years. Those are very important details. But what does Isaiah say? Death and Sheol is the other party, the other signatory with Israel among the many. Israel's motivation is to avoid an overflowing scourge that is apparently being perpetrated by death and Sheol. Israel's participation involves lies and falsehood. So these are the whole menu of details that we have concerning the false covenant, which starts the tribulation period. So it seems like the overriding theme here with this false covenant from Israel's vantage point is they want to build their temple, enable the temple sacrifices. They want to deal with death and Sheol and get them out of the way to avoid the overflowing scourge that they're perpetrating. So let's look at death in Hades, death in Sheol in the Hebrew. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill. They're killing believers, the fifth seal saints. They may be killing more than just believers. Perhaps anybody that dissents from their counterfeit gospel. Now let's look at another one that we might match up here. Who else is killing believers after the rapture? And you have Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of earth, Revelation 17:5. Now this harlot world religion, this counterfeit religion, is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So you have a killing campaign being perpetrated by the harlot world religion, history, martyrs of the saints, but future believers of Jesus, martyrs of Jesus. So I'm going to submit to you that the harlot world religion is the death in Hades that we're talking about here. The death in Hades is killing believers, so is the harlot world religion. I'll explain a little more as we go on this. So unless there's two killing campaigns in the end times after the rapture. The Antichrist, when he's on the scene, is going to behead Christians who don't take the mark of the beast. Death in Hades is martyring the martyrs, drunk with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So unless death in Hades is a third killing campaign after the rapture, which I don't think so, it's got to be one of the two. It's either got to be the Antichrist, who's beheading people, or it's got to be the harlot who's drunk with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Well, we know it's not going to be the Antichrist because he's the white horseman, okay? But this is not the white horseman, this is the pale horseman. So I'm going to pin the tail of the harlot on this donkey, the pale horse, okay? Now, some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about like that, I'm daring to go where no man has gone before, okay? That's the Star Trek eschatologist within me. So don't take my word for it, okay? Be a Berean, Acts 17:11. They were more noble than those in Thessalonica because they would read the scriptures daily to see if these things would be so, okay? I think the Jews are concerned. They don't want to say the martyrs of Jesus and the martyrs of the Jews. This death in Hades is sweeping through the earth, killing maybe a quarter of the earth, maybe more. It's the many because they've got authority over a quarter of the earth. It's not, I mean, this is a force to be reckoned with, whoever they represent, death in Hades. So let's start to expose the myths behind the false covenant. Many people believe that the false covenant is going to bring an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. They believe it's going to create Mideast peace. Now, this is current event driven. There is no scriptural support for this, okay? I'm going to tell you how I believe that is resolved, the Arab-Israeli conflict is resolved, and it's not through this peace covenant. And of course, Donald Trump is going to try to put forward a peace plan as well. We don't know all the language of it, and I'm not going to try to tell you what I think it says or anything like that. I have a lot to say about the false covenant, but this is not the session that I'll be talking about that. I mean, about his potential peace treaty. I think the way the Arab-Israeli conflict gets resolved is militarily, not through some politically brokered peace deal, especially from an American president. We talked about the now prophecies. There's going to be a destruction of Damascus, a final Arab-Israeli war, toppling of Jordan, terrorization of Egypt. It goes on to talk about an emergency of an exceedingly great army, and as a result, Israel's going to expand into territory. It's going to be a greater, safer Israel. These are all in my Now Prophecies book. That will resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict, in my estimation. When that is done, now Israel can start to think about building their temple, because they can get rid of that big dome of the rock that's sitting on the Temple Mount. Okay, that could go bye-bye. Now, I'm not saying that's how that's going to go bye-bye, but it could be. And you know what? The Arabs won't be able to stop it because they'll have been defeated handily by the exceedingly great army. So what is the true content of the false covenant? Well, I believe it has something to do and a whole lot to do, and scripturally supported, with three different clues, with the Jews wanting to build their third temple. Okay, this is prophesied in the Bible. Billy Crone has been talking on this in his sessions, this coming third temple. Now, there are three prevailing points of view as to when the Jews will build their temple. One of them is the temple will miraculously float down from heaven and settle in its appropriate place. How many think that's going to happen? Not a hand in the room, right? Okay, that's not going to happen. The Messiah will come and facilitate the building of the temple. Well, the problem with that is the Messiah has already come. And if they're going to be waiting around when the overflowing scourge is being perpetrated, waiting for the Messiah to just show up at some unannounced time, because they still don't believe in Jesus, the Israeli people, the Jewish people. So we're going to rule that one out as well. But here's the one that's going to motivate them to want to build their temple. The temple will be built and the Messiah will come. Okay? And when the Messiah comes, he will take care of that harlot world religion, that overflowing scourge. He'll get it out of the way, and he will then usher them into their messianic kingdom, which is the high point of Old Testament prophecy. So they want to build the temple to have that start to be hastened and to start to happen, especially in the midst of the problems that are going on with the overflowing scourge. Now, here's a quote from Billy Crone's book, a great book on the final countdown of the tribulation rising, talking about the temple and how quickly it could be constructed. Now, the Jews can, once they can, up on the Temple Mount, they'll throw an altar up and start sacrificing animals and doing offerings in 1 or 2 days. This is pretty much a foregone conclusion. But they will ultimately want to build this temple. Now, here's a quote from his book on page 201. During his meeting, this is Adnan Akhtar, a Muslim leader. During his meeting with the Sanhedrin, Akhtar expressed his belief that the temple could be rebuilt in 1 year at the most. With the construction equipment and materials they have, they think they can knock this building out in 1 year. Rabbi Yehuda Glick, this is on a DVD set that Billy has there. They have satellite photography of the area, and we know exactly where the gold is more than $1 billion worth of gold, meaning sufficient funds to complete the construction of the temple, and is related to what he was talking about there. This is Moshe Feinland, an Israeli member of the Knesset, and he says he wants to build the third temple right away. Here's a quote from him: "I don't want to build the third temple in 1 or 2 years. I want to build it now." Okay, so this kind of appetite to build the temple is only going to increase, and especially when they're dealing with the types of the overflowing scourge that's coming, and they really want to hasten the coming of the Messiah. So, what are the clues that this is what this false covenant has something to do with the Jews wanting to build their temple? Well, the first clue, we're going to turn to Revelation chapter 11. And what's the very first thing that happens? This is in the first half of the tribulation. We see John is giving a measuring reed. And he takes it, and an angel's talking to him. He says, "Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there," the Jews, right? So John is, if this called to build the temple, the false covenant talked about building the temple, the first order of business would be go out and measure it, start making the plans to build it, and this sort of thing. That's a clue that this could be what the true content of the false covenant is. Right out the gate, starting the tribulation, he's measuring the temple. It goes on to say, "But leave the outer court, which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles." That is not the Arab Gentiles in my estimation. They're taken out militarily. This is the harlot Gentiles, the harlot mystery Babylon, at the first half of the tribulation. "And they shall tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. So John is told to measure the temple, count the worshipers therein, take a head count of the worshipers coming in there, but don't measure the outer court. That's for the Gentiles, and they're going to trod through Jerusalem. They're going to have passage through Jerusalem to make their way to that outer court." Now, this is the first time in temple-making history, and the Jews have had 2 prior temples, this will be the third, where they ever had to deal with the Gentiles. But they've got to negotiate with the Gentiles, I believe the harlot world religion, to even build their temple. So here's the other party, the harlot world religion. They're going to be able to trot through Jerusalem for 3.5 years. And I personally believe, some of you know, that that's the Catholic Church who has strong holdings in Jerusalem and that sort of thing. We love the Catholics, but I'm concerned the Catholic Church is the harlot world religion. So they're going to be trotting through there. That's in the first half of the tribulation, the 42 months. They'll be trotting under there for 42 months. And that's one clue. Here's the second clue about the temple. We read Isaiah 28, verses 15, that this agreement with death and Sheol, try to avoid the overflowing scourge. And then Isaiah goes on to say in verses 16 and 17, here's what he says to those leaders of Jerusalem. He says, "Behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily. Also, I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the plummet. The hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the hiding place." Okay, so these guys make this covenant. They want to build their temple. They do it in lies and falsehood. And Isaiah is telling them, don't be hasty. Don't be hasty. You think you're going to bring the Messiah by building this temple. So he uses the idioms. Okay, if you want to build a temple, you need a tried stone to become the precious cornerstone of the temple. And you build the sure foundation around that. That's how you start the construction of the temple. He's saying, but if you believe, don't act hastily. And he says there'll be a measuring line. You need that. You need a plummet for measuring the plumpness of the structure, etc. Now, what we have here is these are also idioms for the real Messiah. Jesus Christ was the tried stone, according to 1 Peter 2, 4-8. Precious cornerstone, Matthew 21, and Ephesians 2, and the sure foundation, 1 Corinthians. What he's telling them is the Messiah has already come. Don't be hasty, because you're going to see a problem happen when this happens. And what's going to happen, the third clue, that this is dealing with the false covenant, is the Antichrist is he's going to confirm the covenant, but he's also going to annul the covenant in the middle of the tribulation. So remember, it says in Daniel 9, he'll confirm the covenant for 1 week, a week of 7 years. But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to the sacrifices and offerings. So if the covenant has something to do with the building of the temple and the Jews being able to reinstate their animal sacrifices and offerings, and you go in and annul the covenant and stop the sacrifices and offerings, that shows a relationship to you could build the temple and start it, but it's not going to last long. And that's why Isaiah was trying to warn them, the Jews, about that. So what it tells us, another proof text, going back into Isaiah 28, verse 18, after we read 15, 16, and 17 earlier, your covenant with death will be annulled, and your agreement with Sheol will not stand. When the overflowing scourge passes through, then you will be trampled down by it. So they think by this covenant, they sign it in lies and falsehood. It's politically expedient for them. They don't buy into what the harlot's teaching. They don't buy into death and Hades counterfeit gospel. They just want to build their temple. They just want to hasten their coming of the Messiah. And when the Messiah comes, he'll just get rid of that harlot, that overflowing scourge. He'll sweep it away, and they will then be able to go into their messianic kingdom, and that's going to motivate them. So they're going to build their temple. They want to build their temple. They're going to want to do the sacrifices and offerings again, bring the Messiah. But Isaiah is saying, don't be hasty. That's not how it's going to go. How it's going to go is your covenant's going to be annulled, and the overflowing scourge is going to overtake you. And here's how that is likely going to play out as I see it. One signatory is the harlot, the many, death and Hades. She's going to be desolated in the middle of the tribulation. She's got an expiration date. She is on the scene after the rapture through that gap and through the first half of the tribulation period, and the Antichrist is working with her. They've got this unholy church and state alliance. It says the harlot rides the beast in Revelation 17. It says that the beast carries her to her heights. So they're in this unholy relationship. He's actually playing second fiddle initially. His time to rise to power has not yet come just yet. So the harlot trusts the Antichrist. They'll allow him to confirm the covenant. Israel trusts the Antichrist. They're the other party. So signatory 1, the harlot, is going to be desolated by the 10 kings in Revelation 17, 16 when she's overextended her usefulness. And here's what it says, Revelation 17, 16. And the 10 horns, these will be the 10 kings which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, and her flesh, and burn her with fire, and give their kingdom to the beast. So they're going to take out the harlot, take all of her wealth, confiscate it all, and all their power and authority with the 10 kings, and they're going to give it to the Antichrist, and that happens in the middle of the tribulation. Signatory 1, gone. She's gone. She's desolated right here. Okay, now what about signatory 2, the Jews? Then the Antichrist, the harlot is desolated by the 10 kings, but then the Antichrist will go in and enter the temple. Remember, Daniel said he's going to go in and stop the sacrifices and offerings in the middle of the tribulation point. The harlot is desolated at the middle of the tribulation point. So it's all happening right at the midpoint of the tribulation. The Antichrist goes into the temple, and he stops the sacrifices and annuls the covenant. Then when he comes out, he goes after signatory 2. He starts a genocidal campaign of the Jews. He's getting the harlot out of the way, signatory 1. That cannot parallel what he wants to do, because when he goes into the temple, he's going to exalt himself above all that's called God and all that's worship. So he does not need a competing counterfeit religion going on with the harlot, and he does not need a competing Judaism on the other hand. So he gets rid of the 2 signatories at that time, and he comes out, we're told in Zechariah 13:8, he says, and it shall come to pass in all the land, says the Lord, that 2/3 of the Jews in it shall be cut off and die, but 1/3 shall be left in it. The good news is there will be a faithful remnant of Jewish people. But this is how I suggest Isaiah saying, don't be hasty. Your covenant's not going to stand. Signatories 1 is going to be taken out by the 10 kings. Antichrist is going to come in and stop your sacrifices, and he's going to go after you. Okay? Now let's shift our attention to the 2 witnesses who are on the scene in the first half of the tribulation. Some people think they're in the second half. And I give my reasons now, tonight, but mainly in the book as to why that just does not seem to make sense. So while the Jews are measuring, John's measuring the temple in Revelation 11:1, and the harlot Gentiles are trading over Jerusalem for 42 months to get to the temple's outer court, the 2 witnesses are going to be prophesying in Jerusalem during that same period of time, 1,260 days, we're told. So this is what's going on. The Jews are going into the temple, trying to worship. The harlot's trotting over Jerusalem, getting into their sacred sites at the outer court and in the old city of Jerusalem. And the 2 witnesses are out. And we're told that they prophesy, and they appear to be prophesying in Jerusalem, because when they get killed, that's where they actually get killed, in Jerusalem, by the Antichrist. So here's these two guys. These two guys are real people, very powerful people. They come on the scene at a critically important time. Let's look at them. And it says that I will give power to these two witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. See how these numbers keep showing up? It's 3.5 years, folks, 3.5 years, the first half and the second half. This is in the first half. What are the details about these two guys? In Revelation 11, verses 3 through 12. They have power to prevent rainfall, turn waters to blood, and strike the earth with plagues. So these are just very powerful individuals. They prophesy for 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth, which was the garb of the old prophets, right? They live in harm's way and kill those who attempt to harm them. People will try to kill them. People are going to be very displeased with what these guys, their messages and what they're doing in their plagues. They will be killed, however, by the Antichrist in the middle of the tribulation. They will lie dead in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days. They will have tormented the unbelievers on the earth dramatically. And when this happens, by the way, the people on the earth will be gift-bearing. They'll be giving gifts to each other. As they see these two witnesses lie dead in the streets, they'll be excited. They'll be thinking the plagues are over. I want to spend a little time talking about that. So they're gift-giving. They tormented everyone on the earth, but they will resurrect after 3.5 days. And so people are going to be watching these guys dead on the streets with their cell phones and their, YouTubes and whatever, and they're going to resurrect. And the gift giving is going to stop. And they're going to ascend to heaven and go up to be up in the heaven. So that's powerful. And then they'll be instrumental in causing many Jews to kind of recognize God, because after they resurrect, there'll be a big earthquake. 7,000 people will die in the Jerusalem area. But it says many people start to go to the Lord and turn to the Lord. What are these guys doing? Who are they? Let's talk about who they are and what are they prophesying. Let's start with who they are first. There are 3 general candidate choices of who these two guys could be. Some think it's Moses and Elijah. Some think it's Enoch and Elijah. And some think it's 2 new faces. Well, they think it's Enoch and Elijah because Enoch was translated up, and so was Elijah. It was raptured up. So technically they never really died. So some people think it's going to be them coming back. The 2 new faces theory, I don't really subscribe to that for this reason. A couple of reasons here. These are the 2, we're told in Revelation 11:4 about these 2 guys. There's the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that's standing before the God of the earth. But this is not the first mention of these 2 guys. They're also mentioned in Zechariah 3 different times. Zechariah 4, these are the 2 olive trees shown up there. And Zechariah 4:14 says, so he said, these are the 2 anointed ones who stand beside the Lord of the whole earth. So it doesn't make sense, really, that at this critical juncture, with all this going on, that 2 new guys are going to show up in town. Now, there's some other reasons why they're more than likely Moses and Elijah. Moses and Elijah already came back, and they were on the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 17, verses 3 and 4. Moses and Elijah possessed in the past the similar supernatural powers that the 2 witnesses possess in the future. Okay? Elijah went up in a whirlwind in heaven and never died in 2 Kings. Malachi predicts that the pre-tribulational return of Elijah in Malachi 4, verses 5 and 6. Now, just so you know, it's not uncommon. I talked to Bob Ulrich about this at Prophecy Watchers. We get emails every once in a while. I get them too, from someone who claims to be one of the 2 witnesses. There are people out there who think they're among one of the 2 witnesses. So I just thought a little humor there, because obviously they're not. But Malachi does predict that Elijah will return, and that holds the Jewish tradition as well, and that's scriptural. He's coming back before the dreadful day of the Lord. Also in Jude, there was a dispute between Satan and Michael the archangel over the body of Moses. Could this imply that Satan is concerned about Moses returning to the earth as one of the 2 witnesses? I mean, they did show up at the Mount of Transfiguration. These would be the 2 worst guys for Satan to want to have on the scene right now. With the Jews trying to reinstate the Mosaic Law and the heart of the Gentiles treading through Jerusalem. And these guys represent the law of Moses represents the law, and Elijah the prophets. So I subscribe to them being Moses and Elijah for those various reasons. And I think they're the perfect candidates to do God's bidding as a rebuttal to the false covenant. that is taking place now and starting the tribulation period. Who are they impacting? Well, they're going to be impacting the Jews going into the temple and the harlot Gentiles traveling through Jerusalem to the outer court. Because as these activities are going on, they got to go by these two guys, these powerful two guys, prophesying, tormenting the earth, calling down plagues. Now remember, John was taking a head count and measure the temple and count the worshipers therein. So when these Jews are going into the temple, when it's constructed, they got to go by these guys, and they're going to be in there trying to sacrifice their offerings. Now here's a picture of Yom Kippur recently at the Western Wall, which is as close as they can really get to the foundation stone where the Temple Mount, up on the Temple Mount, that sort of thing. So I want to show you this picture. This is Yom Kippur. Now when the temple's built, you see this is standing room only here, right? When the temple's built, you can bet the worshipers are going to be standing room only. They're going to be full to capacity. The temple's been built. The sacrifices and offerings are taking place. They got to go by these two guys. Now they're going to be given a message. And what's Moses going to be able to say to these guys? Now remember, Moses, he introduced the law, the 10 Commandments, right? And then the 613 Levitical laws came out from there. It'd be like, if you want to learn about a flood, God would just send Noah and say, this guy can tell you what a flood is. Well, so he puts Moses on the scene. These guys are trying to reinstate the Mosaic law. They want to do their sacrifices and offerings. Moses would be able to inform them that, hey, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world has already come. Jesus Christ, he fulfilled the law. The verses you see are up there on the screen. You guys are sacrificing and offering in futility. Okay? And then he goes on and said, then he would be able to say, the law served as our tutor to bring us to Christ that we might be justified by faith. Okay? That's a reality that Moses would have, that these guys won't have, right? Now, Elijah, on the other hand, so he would be impacting the Jews going to worship, but Elijah would be able to do different things as well, dealing with the harlot Gentiles going through the outer court. Now, here's a book I want to recommend to you, written by Brad Myers, Jim Tetlow, and Roger Oakland, of which I get this next slide from, dealing with the Queen of All and comparing her to Jezebel, the harlot, and much more than that in their book. But here's some comparisons that you'll find. Now, remember, Elijah was on the scene when Jezebel, the false prophetess, one of the most wicked women in the Old Testament, was on the scene. So Elijah would be able to make these acknowledgments, okay? Jezebel's traits compared to the harlot's traits, okay? She was a queen, 1 Kings. Revelation 18 talks about this. Idolatrous, 1 Kings and Revelation 2:20 and 17:4. She was a harlot, 2 Kings 9. Revelation 17, the harlot world religion. She kills the saints, remember? Jezebel killed the saints. She killed the prophets also. The harlot is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus, and the prophets were told in Revelation 18:24. She's destroyed, 2 Kings 9, and in Revelation 17:16, remember we talked about the 10 kings will desolate the harlot. We've got these comparisons, okay? So who's the perfect guy to be on the scene at that time, to be singling out the problems with the harlot world religion, the false religion? It would be Elijah. So who else are they impacting? They're impacting all of mankind. It says in Revelation 11:6, these have the power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy, and they have power over the waters to turn them to blood and to strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire. They're tormenting the earth. It says, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them, make merry and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So they're affecting all of mankind. They're not only just creating havoc in Jerusalem as the Jews are trying to go into the temple, and they're saying messages to these Jews going into the temple, right? They got to go by them. Your sacrifices are futile. They're probably telling about, hey, the Antichrist is going to come in and abominate the temple. He's going to try to kill all you. And what are they prophesying about, right? How do the Jews know when that happens what they're supposed to do? Are they all going to just turn to the Bible and find out what we're supposed to do when the abomination and desolation happens? Anyway, think about that sort of stuff. What is the impact and effect they're having in Jerusalem, but they're also affecting all of mankind because of plagues. And so bad, they're tormenting all of earth that they're rejoicing and giving gifts when the Antichrist goes in and kills them. People have tried to harm them, but they can't harm them. But the Antichrist goes in and kills them, and they lie dead in the streets. Now, there's going to be some plagues going on. They're called the trumpet judgments at this time. They fit right hand in hand with the two witnesses. So the trumpet judgments have plagues. I'm going to read some of these plagues to you, and then I'm going to suggest to you, and these are sounding trumpets, these are coming out by angels, but the world's not going to be able to distinguish necessarily who's causing these plagues. They're likely to think that Moses and Elijah, because you'll see some of these plagues are very similar to what Moses and Elijah have power over, or the two witnesses have power over, and I don't think they're going to make the distinction. So when these plagues are hitting the earth, and the Antichrist kills these two witnesses, they're going to be, wow, the plagues are over. But the trumpet judgments are what we're talking about, and the plagues aren't over. The bowl judgments are going to follow behind in the second half of the tribulation. Again, think about someone you love, because they could be experiencing this stuff, and it's going to get heavy right now. The first trumpet is hail and fire mixed with blood, and burns up 1/3 of the trees and all the green grass. Then the second trumpet, there's this great burning mountain that's thrown down into the sea and destroys 1/3 of the sea, 1/3 of the sea creatures, and 1/3 of the ships. So this is a big judgment. 1/3 of the sea is going to be destroyed. The ships, the commercial ships, 1/3 of them are going to be hurt. Then the third trumpet judgment is a star falls from heaven called wormwood, and 1/3 of the rivers turn bitter, and many men die. Now we're starting to see more death going on in the scene here. Now, drinking water will be affected by this. Then the fourth, it says 1/3 of the sun, the moon, and the stars are darkened, and 1/3 of the day, and then 1/3 of the day there is no light. These are bad judgments, but you know what? The worst ones are going to come. The woe judgments are going to start to come. Woe number 1 is the 5th trumpet judgment. This is a locust invasion, probably demonic, launched by Apollyon to torment men for 5 months. Woe number 2, they're woe judgments because they're worse than the first 4, and each one gets worse behind the other. A 200 million man army, demonic army, kills 1/3 of mankind. So the first woe, there's tormenting for 5 months mankind, and I'll tell you what bracket within mankind, what subset we're talking about here in just a minute. And then there's going to be 1/3 of mankind killed by these trumpet judgments, the woe number 2. So here's how the trumpet judgments correlate in timing with the two witnesses. Got this timeline in the book. We see that they're inseparable from a verse I'm going to show you. The two witnesses are on the scene for 1,260 days, 3.5 years. The trumpet judgments are happening in an interplay with their existence. They may not last for 3.5 years, the trumpet judgments, but they last, the first 6 of them take place during this first 3.5 years. So we see that woe number 1 is the 5th trumpet, torments for 5 months. Woe number 2 is the 6th trumpet. The two witnesses get killed at the midpoint of the tribulation. They die, they resurrect, and they ascend. And then the verse that comes right after that happens says, the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. So we know, we can deduce logically that by the time these guys ascend up into heaven, the first 6 trumpet judgments have happened. Woe number 2 has passed, it says, which means woe number 1, the 5 months of torment has passed, which means the first 4 trumpet judgments have passed, okay? Simple math. And I get into it in the book. And then it says the third woe is coming quickly. So the 7th trumpet judgment, the third woe, and takes us into the second half of the tribulation. And that's going to be the trumpet judgment, the bowl judgments, and they are, it says the wrath of God is completed in those judgments. Well, number 3, the 7th trumpet judgment initiates the second half of the tribulation and the 7 bowl judgments. So why are these two witnesses not in the second half of the tribulation? Well, first of all, they're on the scene when they're counting the temple worshipers, okay? Well, they're not going to be counting temple worshipers in the temple during the second half because the Antichrist is going to be trying to kill them. So if a Jew's trying to get in the temple in the second half, he's going to be a target of the Antichrist. If they were in the second half, they'd be disobeying God because Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken by Daniel the prophet, the Antichrist goes into the temple, he stops the sacrifices and offering in the midpoint of the tribulation. And Jesus says, when you see that, you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, saying, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. By the way, that's a command. Whoever reads this needs to understand this. We need to understand this. It's a requirement. We need to understand the brevity of what's being said here. And the Jews will need to understand this too, who start to read this, because this is going to be their rescue plan. You understand this, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And what he's alluding to is the mountain of southern Jordan over there. We find out in Isaiah 63, that's where Jesus is going to come for the remnant in ancient Basra. That's called Petra today. So they're going to be going there. And the two witnesses supposed to be going there too if they were in the second half. they appear to be Jewish, right? All Jews are supposed to go and flee when they see that happen. They'd be disobeying that command. Also, that would infer that the Antichrist is religiously tolerant. Okay, 10 kings have taken out the harlot. He's going to start killing all the Jews. Harlot's been beheading Christians. He's going to start beheading Christians. But he's going to allow these two guys to stand in Jerusalem and preach Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. That's not going to happen. He's not religiously tolerant. He's exalting himself above all that's called God. So that's not a realistic assessment. And they would be in a genocidal exception because he's going to try to kill all the Jews. And also, the bowl judgments have to happen, and it wouldn't happen if they were in the second half and they died at the end, etc. So I've kind of said enough on that. But let's talk about this woe number 1, woe number 2, because this is where the pedal hits the metal. Woe number 1, the 5th trumpet judgment. Are these locusts, demons, or artificial intelligent drones? Some people speculate it could have something to do with AI. So we have this fallen angel named Apollyon, which means a destroyer. He gets cast down from heaven, down upon the earth, and he unlocks the abyss. Now the abyss is that temporary place of confinement for fallen angels and demons. It is a place where demons feared to be sent and where they were cast out by the Messiah. And it is temporary for the final abode for the fallen angels before they get cast into the lake of fire. That was a quote from Arnold Fruchtenbaum, and the proof text on that is this one here, Luke 8:31 and 32. And Jesus asked him, "What is thy name?" And this is a man was demon-possessed, and he said, "My name is Legion." So these are the demons speaking out to Jesus. For many demons were entered into him, and they entered him and said, "Command." And they entreated him that he would not command them to depart into the abyss. So they're asking Jesus, don't send us into the abyss. Now there was a herd of swine feeding on the mountain, and they entreated Jesus that he would give them leave to enter into them, and he gave them leave, and they went there. And of course those swine went and in a steep fall into the lake. The point being, they do not want to go into the abyss. This is a temporary holding tank for these guys before they get into the lake of fire. They'd rather be in swine than go into this abyss. Well, this guy comes down and unlocks the abyss, Apollyon. Okay, this is a bad zip code. And it's a big place. Smoke arises, like from a furnace, and darkens the sun and moon. Worldwide it appears to be, right? So here come these locusts. Who are they? What are they going to do? Out of the smoke come the locusts with power like scorpions. And they were commanded not to harm the grass or the earth or any green thing or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Okay, very interesting. They're given specific instructions. They're asked not to harm the grass or any green thing. Well, wait a minute. The first trumpet harmed the trees and the green things, but now they're saying, don't you, locusts, harm those things. Why would they be commanded that? Well, because if Satan's about to put together with his Antichrist soon and try to restore the world and to be a utopian place and all that, it defeats his purposes to have more green things destroyed, right? So he tells them don't do that, which, by the way, locusts like to eat grass, right, and green things, right? But he says, do not harm the guys with the seal of God on their foreheads. It goes on to say, men without the seal of God will desire death but be unable to die. So they're going to torment men for 5 months to the point where they would rather die, and they're going to know when that point is, and not to let them, and they won't be able to die. So the first observation we're going to make here, they're tormenting the people who do not have the seal of God. So I'm going to suggest it's really important that those loved ones we raised our hands for get the seal of God, and get the seal of God before this judgment. Okay? So if they get left behind, they immediately want to get the seal of God, so they're going to need to know what that is. And we're going to talk about that. Matter of fact, it would actually be smart if they got the seal of God before the tribulation, right? If they got the seal of God before the rapture, right? Because then they don't go through any of that. So we're going to spend a little time as I close talking about that, but we're not quite ready for that yet. So they're tormenting men for 5 months to the point of where they would rather die, those that don't have the seal of God. And here's what they have. They have crowns of gold, faces like men, women like hair, lion-like teeth, breastplates of iron, and they sounded like chariots with many horses. Are these locusts? Well, here's what I put in the book. Let's see, they originate from the bottomless pit, and this is not where locusts originate from. They come through the egg and nymph and adult stages, lacking the pupa stage. Thus they are birthed on earth and not the bottomless pit. 2, they have power like scorpions to strike men. Locusts don't even bite people, let alone sting men like a scorpion. 3, they follow the instructions not to harm the grass or any green thing or any tree. And since locusts feed upon foliage and stems of plants such as herbs and grasses, it's not reasonable to assume that they would ignore these fine locust delicacies, right? So these are not locusts, and then locusts don't have crowns of gold, faces like men, etc. And locusts are not ruled by a fallen angel, but demons are, okay? So here's the point. A demonic invasion that is tormenting men that don't have the seal of God for 5 months. This could be someone we know and love that gets left behind if this was to happen soon. And then we're not told what happens to these guys when it's done, these bad locusts. We're not told how many there are, but they're tormenting unbelievers worldwide, so this is a bad demonic invasion. So what happens after they're done with their task, their stint? We don't know. They seem to be lurking around in the shadows of earth somewhere, right? It doesn't say they go anywhere. And then all of a sudden, here comes the 6th judgment, the trumpet judgment, the woe judgment. Revelation 9:12 says, 1 woe is now past. That's the 5th trumpet judgment. Behold, still 2 more woes are forthcoming. And let's look at this one, woe number 2. A 200 million man demonic army in Revelation 9, verses 13 through 21. And it says the 4 angels are released at the Euphrates to kill a third of mankind, They were just tormenting mankind for 5 months. These are going to actually kill a third of mankind. And I point out in the book that these appear to be also unbelievers. And it's a 200 million strong army. Are they demons? Are they man? Are they the Chinese army? We'll talk about that. And they've got breastplates of fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. They have heads of lions and mouths that emit fire, smoke and brimstone, and they have tails like serpents having heads. Now, some people think this is the Chinese army, okay? And the reason they think that is because once upon a time, China said they could support a 200 million man army. And they then say, well, look at, there's a couple prophecies dealing with the Euphrates River. We just read the 6th trumpet judgment. The 4 angels are bound at the great river Euphrates. They release this 200 million man army to kill a third mankind. But an entirely different judgment has nothing to do with this. These people allude to, say this is dealing with the kings of the east at the Euphrates, and that's a 6th bowl judgment. That says that the 6th bowl, the great river Euphrates, it's open and the water's dried up, so that on the way, the kings of the east could make their way over, and they're going to make their way over to join the Antichrist at Armageddon, okay? These are 2 distinctly different judgments, okay? So the theory was the kings of the east, a 200 million man army equals the Chinese army, okay? That's not what's going on here. That would be like saying the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago Bears are the same because they're both from Chicago, right? No, one plays in a different season, one's a different sport than the other, right? You can't make that connection. I like what my friend Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum says. Remember, these are they have breastplates of fiery red, hyacinth blue, sulfur yellow, heads of lions, mouths that emit fire, smoke, and brimstone, tails like serpents having heads. Here's what Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum says in his great book called The Footsteps of Messiah on page 231. A person would be hard-pressed to find just one Chinese person who looks like this, let alone 200 million of them. The description given of the army clearly rules out their being human and requires that they be demonic. Furthermore, the means by which the destruction of 1/3 of the world's population is accomplished is fire, smoke, and brimstone. This involves the supernatural rather than the natural. So we have locusts lurking around in the shadows. They're done. 200 million man demonic army coming up, killing a third of mankind. What do we got, another billion people there? By the time we get to this stage, probably half the world's population has been taken out. And what happens to them when they're done? They seem to be lurking up in the shadows too. We don't know where they go. And at this point in the middle of the tribulation, this is now, it says the 2nd woe is past, this is past, and the midpoint of the tribulation, the 2 witnesses are ascended up to heaven. There's a war in heaven in Revelation chapter 12. And Michael, the archangel, defeats Satan, and he's cast down to the earth, and 1/3 of the angels come down with him. So look who's going to meet up with 1/3 of the angels that are cast down. It says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because Satan has come down and he knows his time is very short. So they're probably going to hook up with the locusts and hook up with their friends, the 200 million man demon army, and our loved ones, if they haven't got the seal of God by then, are going to experience this, if we're the final generation. Who thinks we're the final generation? Okay, for those of you who don't think that, keep studying. Keep watching the signs of the times, And I think you're going to pretty soon realize, and especially when you start to see the fulfillment of a now prophecy or two, that the end times clock is ticking, and we're deep into the end times. So let's just remember what it said, that woe number 2 kills a third of the mankind. Clearly states that by fire, smoke, and brimstone. Now let's talk about the 144,000 witnesses as we get close to winding down now. They will also be on the scene at the time. So the good news is for our loved ones is they've got the 2 witnesses going to be preaching with power, and they have also got these 144,000 witnesses in Revelation 7 preaching the gospel out worldwide ministry, and they'll create a worldwide revival, which we'll talk about. But it's interesting. These 12 tribes are listed in Revelation chapter 7, 12,000 from each tribe. That's where we get the count of 144,000. But their names are listed out of chronological, genealogical order. Now, normally in the Bible, when you look at a genealogy, they're listed the first son, the second son, the third son, etc. But this is all messed up. These names are misordered. Judah was the 4th son. Reuben was the 1st son. Gad the 7th. So you can see they're all out of genealogical order. So when that happens, you kind of look a little deeper and see if the Holy Spirit did that on purpose, right? And it turns out it looks like he did. When you look at the meanings of their names, Judah means praise God. Reuben means behold the sun, and I'll just read these: good fortune, happiness, my wrestling, God has caused me to forget, hearing, joining, God has given me higher, elevated, increasing, son of the right hand. Okay, now these guys come on the scene. The Jews are trying to reinstate the Mosaic law, and here's what they understand in their mission statement. It's a mystery behind the ordering of their names. And here's what I believe, if you paraphrase this, will be their understanding as they go into ministry. Praise God for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Behold, his son of good fortune and happiness. My struggle with sin and the Mosaic law, God has caused me to forget. Hearing of the mystery of our grafting in with the Gentiles, God has reinstated me into an elevated position of ministry once again, and is increasing those being saved through Christ, the Son of the right hand. That's what those names mean, and that will be their understanding, in my estimation, of this whole different thing. The Mosaic law has been fulfilled. The Jews think they still need to fulfill the Mosaic law, but these guys will understand that's not the case, and they create a worldwide revival. So that's the good news for our loved ones, okay? There will be a worldwide revival. It says in Revelation 9, verses 9 through 17, John sees this innumerable multitude, a great multitude that no one could count, from all nations, tribes, people standing before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, crying out, salvation belongs to the Lord our God, to God and the Lamb. These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb, saved through Jesus Christ. Let's go back and talk about the 5th seal saints for a minute, who our loved ones could be among, and who could be among those in the great tribulation. So when you open the 5th seal, they're crying out, how long, O Lord, until you judge and avenge our blood? Now, why are they asking that question? If they died in the tribulation period, they would have seen the confirmation of the false covenant. This is happening at a time when prophetic awareness is at an all-time high. Damascus has probably been destroyed. The raptures happen. Certain things are going on. These guys should be acutely aware of Bible prophecy at this time. 144,000 witnesses coming on the scene. And they're asking God, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? It seems like that would be an unnecessary question if they saw the false covenant, because of the time specificity having been confirmed. So I would submit to you that I believe they die in the gap. Okay, they don't know how much longer, or they wouldn't ask that question. And they're very concerned about how much longer that's going to continue, because this harlot is killing people all over the place. The response they get from God is not, well, that's a silly question. Why did you ask me that? Didn't you see the confirmation of the false covenant? That's not what he says. He says, and a white robe was given to them representing their salvation, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. So he's talking about 3 different periods of Christian martyrdom. The 5th seal saints, the fellow servants of the 5th seal saints, and the brethren of the fellow servants of the 5th seal saints. And he's telling them they need to rest a little bit longer because these other periods of martyrdom are going to have to ensue. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to dare to go where no man has gone before and tell you what I believe he's telling them. I believe the 5th seal saints are killed in the gap. They don't know how much longer until the confirmation of the false covenant and the 7-year time clock of the tribulation starts ticking. They are killed by the harlot world religion, who comes on the scene after the rapture. their fellow servants are also killed. And they ask, how long, O Lord? And then the false covenant gets confirmed. And then the harlot comes on the scene and is killing the fifth seal saint, the fellow servants of the fifth seal saints. That happens in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. So you got the fellow servants going on, killed by the same culprit, the harlot, in the first half of the tribulation. The 10 kings desolate the harlot, and all of a sudden the Antichrist comes on the scene, and he's beheading the brethren of the fellow servants. So you got these two different killing campaigns of the harlot and the 10 king and the Antichrist, and you got the 3 different Christian periods of martyrdom. Okay, that's my suspicion of what the response means. Any way you look at it, it's all bad for anyone who gets left behind. Woe judgments, trumpet judgments, demons all over the place, etc. So let's go back and look at those loved ones that we talked about earlier. The ones that you raised your hand for. And let's talk about the seal of God and reflect back on that woe judgment number 1. It says that they will harm everybody who does not have the seal of God. They'll torment them for 5 months. We said, well, let's get the seal of God. Let's tell people how to get the seal of God. Let's get that before that trumpet judgment happens, okay? 144,000 witnesses will have the seal of God. We're told that in Revelation 7 verses 2 and 3, I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their forehead. So they're told these angels are told not to harm the sea, the earth, and the trees, which means these guys come on the scene before those trumpet judgments, and those things are harmed, right? So they're on the scene, and they have the seal of God on their foreheads. So here's the thing. Is the seal of God only for believers? What is the seal of God? How do we obtain the seal of God, and do you have the seal of God? Okay? How many things, and also, how does the mark of the beast contrast with the seal of God? Because that's coming too. Okay, the mark of the beast, Satan's seal, in contrast to the seal of God. How many believe the seal of God is for believers only? Okay, well, you have scriptural support for that, okay? The Greek word is phrases, and it's a signet, a fencing in, a protecting for misappropriation. It's a stamp impressed. It's literally a seal. It shows up 16 times in the New Testament. 11 of those times are used for the seal judgments, but the other 5 times are specifically dealing with believers. Romans 1 talks about the seal of Abraham's righteousness through faith. 1 Corinthians 9 talks about the seal of Paul's apostleship to the Corinthians. 2 Timothy 2 talks about the seal of acknowledgement that the Lord knows who believes in him. Revelation 7 talks about the sealing of the 144,000 witnesses, and Revelation 9 talks the seal of protection from the locust invasion. So it is for believers. Believers get the seal of God, but how do they get the seal of God? What is the seal of God? It is essentially God, this is a quote from my book, it's essentially God's stamp of divine approval and spiritual protection upon the believer. It is a form of identification that separates the believers from the unbelievers. It appears to be an intangible identifier that is only visible to the Trinity, angelic hosts, good and fallen, demonic realms like the locusts, because they're able to determine who's got the seal of God. So that's one possible definition of that. How do you get it? How do you get the seal of God? I put several verses that are proof text in the book, but here's the main one that really says it all. It says in Ephesians 1, verses 13 and 14, in him, referring to Jesus Christ, you, to the believer, also trusted after you heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, in whom also you have believed, you were sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise, who is the guarantee of our intelligence, until the redemption of the purchased possession to the praise of his glory. So here's what is being said right there as we unpack it. This is how you obtain the seal of God. A person hears the word of truth, which is the gospel message of salvation. They believe it. Then they receive it, meaning they accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. Having heard, believed, and received, they put all their trust in him. As a result of becoming a believer, they were sealed with the Holy Spirit, a promise. The Holy Spirit serves as the guarantee of their eternal redemption. This is what happens when you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior. If you've done that, you have the seal of God. And you'll be raptured and you'll be taken out of here. And this is what we want our loved ones to know and to do as well. And if you don't have the seal of God right now, you run the risk of having to deal with the seal of Satan. The mark of the beast, the seal of Satan. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. The image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, that no one will be able to buy or sell except that they have the mark of the beast and the name of the beast or the number of his name. So let's go back, after looking at all this bad stuff, to Ron. Okay, hopefully Ron now is invigorated, because he doesn't want his loved ones to go through this. He's going to give it a second effort. He's going to try to reach out to them. He's going to put that letter in the book, but instead of saying, I told you so, because this isn't about being right, okay? This is about leaving a message for our loved ones. He's going to say, I love you, so I love you so much, and then you're going to fill in the blanks on the letter. You write what you want to say to your loved ones who are going to potentially get left behind to experience these kinds of things. This stuff is very powerful stuff. And this is why we care, because we're talking about the demons coming, and this is just the first half of the tribulation. Okay? So listen, I want to thank you for your time. We're going to go out and get ready for the last guys here. It's been a great conference. Have you guys enjoyed it? Okay? And so thank you very much, and we'll see you out in the foyer.